Well, good afternoon to people who are in the UK or Europe, and good morning to early risers in America. Hopefully you're on the East Coast. I don't want to have any 4 a.m.s from San Francisco. That would be cruel and inhuman. And it's crazy enough in America at the moment. But good afternoon to you if you're in Europe and the UK, and good evening if you are in Asia. It's Azeem Azhar here with Exponential View. And we've got a fantastic conversation that's going to kick off in a few minutes with Tabitha Goldstaub, who, amongst other things, is the author of a new book, How to Talk to Robots. But it seems a bit unfair to just describe Tabitha as the author of a new book, because she does so many other things that we will discover in due course. So a little bit about Exponential View and about myself. So Exponential View is it's a network, it's a newsletter that I bring together to talk about the next 10, 20 years and how certain technologies, in particular artificial intelligence, are going to change the way that we live, as technologies often do. If you are not a subscriber of the newsletter, I do suggest you go to exponentialview.co, www.exponentialview.co, where you can sign up. And I noticed that we've got viewers from South Africa and from Rwanda, amongst others, and Senegal as well. I would love to have more African subscribers to my newsletter. I was born in Zambia, and so I have a emotional resonance with the continent. We do these talks. It's a new series that we've started. This is our third on a Friday. We're talking to Tabitha about robots this week. Next week, we have John Micklethwaite, who's the editor-in-chief at Bloomberg, who will be talking about the post-pandemic order and the struggles that Western states have had in tackling with it. And there's a few excellent talks coming up in Fridays after that. So let me talk to you about today's session. We're going to be talking with Tabitha Goldstaub, and Tabitha is, of course, the author of this new book, but she is also the chair of the UK government's AI Council on Artificial Intelligence, a member of the board of TechUK, and a co-founder of CogX, which, amongst other things, is the leading interdisciplinary technology conference that exists within Europe. Tabitha, I'm going to bring you online in a second, so be ready. Here we go. Hi, Tabitha.
Hello.
Hey,
Hi.
You're there. Look, she's there. It's wonderful.
I'm loving watching other people joining as well. I can see everybody in the corner. This is super. Thanks, everybody.
It's pretty exciting, and we need to find some way of amplifying this on social, because apparently that is how it works these days, and hopefully there'll be tweets coming through. So Tabitha, it's great to have you here. You have just written a book, published a book. In fact, you probably wrote it a little while ago, How to Talk to Robots. Just to remind you, I think as an author, you may feel, when did I write this? It's subtitled A Girl's Guide to AI. Why did you think it was important to put together a Girl's Guide to AI?
So there were a lot of manuals out there, a lot of ways that men are getting this information, but that wasn't really the initial impetus. The initial impetus was a kind of selfish feeling. I felt like as an arts graduate, I was way too fortunate to have such an incredible front row seat to what was going on in the AI industry, and now policy making as well. And there was this kind of feeling where I was scurrying away this information, and only I knew, and the industry obviously that I worked in knew, and I wasn't sharing this, and it sat uncomfortably with me, because I think that the younger version of myself would have been fascinated, but I had no way to get involved in this when I was a teenager. And so I figured that it was really my job to go and do what I would like to have read when I was a teenager, and turn, hopefully, what is quite complicated and often a lot of arguments about what artificial intelligence is into enough of information that young women can now start to have this conversation themselves. So ultimately, this is meant to be sort of the first book you pick up about AI. And then you'll see in the back, there is, I think, a good 25 pages worth of book lists and advice on where to go next. This is definitely not a definitive book in any way. It's the first door into having this discussion and being able to read your newsletter and enjoy your podcast, but with the basic understanding first, because I think a lot of what is out there at the moment is quite it expects that the reader already knows so much, and yet we're not explaining this to people. It's not in Vogue, it's not in Marie Claire, it's not in Grazia, and so that's been my objective, really, is to make sure that I get it to where those young women are reading.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting observation. So you consider your work here to be the launching pad for further exploration. It is the base camp to level your readers up.
It's the car park even. It's not even the base camp. Like I know that sounds like I'm doing myself down, but I really don't think that it's the base camp. It's the kind of, hey guys, come over here. Like, this is fun. This is cool. This is something to do. And then the second your interest is piqued, I'm hoping that you go and spend time reading, Marina Mazzucato and Sophia Noble and Caroline Carano Perez, and there's incredible other authors. But my concern often was that you needed to have a little bit of a more basic understanding before you could understand those books.
And in your work over the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, you founded a company that was CogX that was focusing on, in particular, AI as a technology. You would have seen and spoken to everybody who is making breakthroughs, making investments, building businesses in the field. What had you seen about the gap between women's participation and access to this particular technology? I mean, we hear about it a lot. I've seen this gap myself, but how do you characterize it?
So I think that there's a gap. There's a gap in two places. There's a gap in what products are being built and who those products are for. So there's a gap in terms of the output, which I'm sure we'll come to, but the gap that concerned me initially was who was actually building the technology. So 13% of, this is a Nesta report, 13% of AI research is done by women. So ultimately, if you come all the way up to like the fundamentals of how this technology is advancing, it's only, just over 10% of people are women. That just fundamentally cannot result in the end product being useful and used by women. So we have this kind of huge risk if we don't change the number of women that are getting involved in building the technology. Now, my book is not about encouraging women to get involved in building the technology, because that is happening across the board. There are so many initiatives, whether it's girls in coding, whether it's women in AI, there's a lot of great initiatives there. What I want to do is say, how are you going to use this technology in the meantime? And as a woman, I personally don't think that we have enough of we're not given the tools right now in which to feel comfortable working alongside an AI. And that is what's going to happen. And it's already happening. If you're in marketing and you use HubSpot, if you use the latest Google Mail where it recommends your next sentence, like, you're using AI. But I don't think that really we're being able to feel comfortable with this new technology. It's just getting faster and faster and faster. Right. So what the book's meant to do is more be a career guide. It's not a tech book. It's a career guide. It's a how to get along with this rather than how to build it or how to make it.
So I think it's quite well understood that computer science over the last 40 years has had a declining number of women work in it, although that started to change in the last 3 or 4. And that, yes, your point that about only less than 1 in 6 of the people who were developing AI systems at a very sort of high and expert level were women. That was also, I think, as you say, has been well understood, and that there's a lot of moves, girls who can code, and a set of different movements that have been making progress there. Your observation was really more about the use of these tools that are emerging into our everyday life. And I think you've identified a few. You've talked about, the way that Gmail makes suggestions for what you should say next, or maybe the Amazon Alexa, and so on. Had you seen in your conversations with people really specific gaps that were emerging between men and women in how they actually interacted rather than built these products?
Yeah, so I think I've got to be very careful about describing it sort of like men and women being different.
Right.
But I can talk about the women in my life, so my friends and my family. And what I started to see was, all my friends who were bankers, accountants, lawyers, marketing people, fashion people, photographers, they would stay at home, work from home mothers. Those women were actively saying to me things at dinner: oh God, Tabs, what you do is so awful. Like, I hate artificial intelligence. My Alexa only listens to my husband. Or, I just cannot make that Siri thing work on my phone. It's ridiculous. I hate the fact that, constantly my son is asking Siri to buy things, and I'm stuck and I'm lost and I can't do it. And I watched these women get like hot and stressed and like, oh my God, and like panicky. I was like, whoa, this is like an inherent kind of like social fabric. Peppa Pig's mum can't use the computer.
Oh, so we've got an incredibly international audience. So I've seen Mali, Indonesia, South Africa.
And they have Peppa Pig there
Dominican Republic, Rwanda, the UK, the US. So there's a lot of representation. Not everyone will know Peppa Pig. So please just explain Peppa Pig to us.
I wonder, will they actually all know Peppa Pig? So Peppa Pig is the, as I understood the sort of the world-renowned, but maybe UK-renowned kids book where, there's a family and they basically spend their whole time splashing in puddles. I have a 1-year-old, so, Peppa Pig's pretty cool right now. And I'm reading it, and suddenly the computer dies and mummy takes the computer to daddy. And it's just this constant kind of feeling where women are just not meant to be good at this. And it doesn't really matter because, it's kind of famously like, oh, I'm not good at that. Like I almost like a pride. And I started seeing it so often. And then I also saw one other type of shift with my friends, where my mother's a really good example of somebody who is, quite likes to say that she's dreadful at technology, and if she touches a machine, it doesn't work, and she can't even use the remote. And I try and tell her, like, okay. But what I noticed is now that her TV talks, and now she can speak to her TV, she can make the TV work. So actually the developments that we're seeing are getting better and more accessible for people who find technology difficult. And that excited me, because that started to make me think that there's a unique skill that women have, or women have been encouraged to develop around empathy, asking good questions, thinking around the subject, creative thinking, chatting. And actually, those are the skills that you're going to need in this next wave of technology, whereby everything talks to you. If you want to get, to get into my building here, you have to, say, hello, I've arrived, and then it takes your temperature.
What?
Yeah, it's really cool.
Wow, I've not left my house in 7 months, so I have no idea. I just come in. I mean, I just go into the garden and come back out. But your building, literally, you have to speak to get in.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it works. It works. I can get in without saying hello, but to take my temperature, it's part of the rules. And I just love the fact. I like the fact that if we can start to use this technology, and we can make sure that women feel like they are not only like gonna be good at this, but they're gonna be the best at this. Mm-hmm. How can we arm them? And so the back of the book, the penultimate chapter before that book list I told you about, is all advice, and it's about like, don't give up talking to your Alexa. Stop saying please and thank you. It's got advice around like creating working groups with your friends, learn about this together. And so what I'm trying to do is give women the confidence to to keep testing and keep going, because this is not going to stop.
Right. So this is, in a sense, this is you recognized in your conversations that this very strange language had emerged around interactions with technology. I think other people may be familiar with it, and it is quite. I mean, it's quite confusing, because if you look at the history of computer science since it was a thing, in fact, there are a number of remarkable women. There's Katherine Johnson, who was a mathematician doing all the orbital mechanics for the early US manned space program. There was Grace Hopper, who was a naval admiral involved in the definition of computer science. Margaret Hamilton, who programmed the Apollo guidance computer. And in fact, as a profession, it had a lot of women involved until the late 70s or early 80s. Look, you've already answered the question. So this is why the book works, because there Tabitha is holding up on page. Tell me the page. So
page number, oh my God, 24. So I've rewritten
the history of AI, focusing on women, and many of these women I've spoken to as well in my podcast series. So Fei Li and Meredith Whittaker and so on. So there was this discontinuity, and I think, as I said, it's been well studied. It is so interesting that you identified a phenomenon, which was that somehow these technologies were sneaking their way in, and half of the population was more inclined to say they struggled with it. Why do you think that was?
I think so. What I found really interesting when I started doing the research, and I had an amazing woman called Eve who helped me with the research. But when you do the research of like the history of AI from a male perspective, the history of AI as everybody knows it today, it's very like a singular heroic man at every point, whether it's Turing or Minsky or, it's like doof, doof, doof. It's this sort of genius. One genius. And then when you start doing the same from a women's perspective, it's groups of women. It's teams of women. It's the women in the hut, at Bletchley Park, Hut 83. Anyway, it's the women at Bletchley Park together. It's Karen Smart Jones and her team. It's kind of Dorothy Vaughan and the women who are the other computers. And so there's this kind of collegiate feeling. And I was really interested in that difference. And so in the book, I definitely talk about kind of trying to come together with other people in order to feel like you're making progress. And I think that what happened in the sort of 80s, 90s was this sort of individualistic societal feeling of like, you've all got to be, you got to be a man in a man's world to like fight. And you've got to like close that door behind you. Otherwise other women are coming in like, sort of what's it called? Browbeating. And I think that can't have helped. And I was looking for studies because someone far smarter than me will have done this research, but I couldn't find it at the time for what that phenomenal shift was. But I think we kind of, in feminist history, there was definitely a step back at the same time as there was a step back in, But Ma Hicks, I think, gets it the most right, which is that there was a moment where computing suddenly became something that there was money to be made in. And it was suddenly gone from kind of research and government funding to like commercial. And Ma Hicks wrote Programmed Inequality. And so her research was much more quantitative, like she could actually see exactly where the difference was. So my hope is that a little bit of a mixture of my kind of gut feeling and her facts mean that the next wave of society, if we can get this right, there is hope that this can be something that men and women can be doing together interchangeably, and the best skills of women, the best skills of men, and the teamwork together can come to fruition. And yet, though, I see constantly companies being proud of like a person beating a machine. And what I'm really trying to encourage more of is a group of people a group of people and machines beating a group of people and machines. Like, wouldn't that be cooler? So, could we have a human and a machine chess team and a human and a machine chess team, and then see which one wins, like which AI helps the human more? And I have seen, DeepMind did do one paper on this. Microsoft has done some research in this space. But yet what gets the press and what gets the headlines is man versus machine. So, it's all rigged against us.
It is all rigged against us. So you spoke to a lot of people in this, and of course, through your work at CogX, you see a lot of applications. So let's talk a little bit about applications. Before we get there, I just want to remind people that we're talking with Tabitha Goldstaub, who's the author of, let's get this in front of the camera, this book, How to Talk to Robots, and presumably you can get it from your bookshop of choice. And if you are watching on Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube, it's always really helpful for you to hit the share button so more people can sort of hear this conversation. So Tabitha, let's talk about applications. You see a lot, and I'm really curious about going through a few of your favorite AI applications at the moment. So let's start with sort of one at a time. Tell me, what are you excited about?
So before we do the one at a time, I have to just start with the best use of artificial intelligence is anything to do with fighting the climate crisis. So I'll take any application, but I think that what you're really asking me is kind of some of the things that I'm using today or things that I find interesting. But we all just have to start with the big caveat, which is if you are an academic, if you're a researcher, if you're a scientist, if you're an engineer, point your tools and your incredible talent at the climate. If you like me, just love using artificial intelligence products, then I can tell you some of the other applications. So my favorite that I found this week is a AI transcribing editing software. So the chat that you and I are having right now, I've been trying to make my own podcast, and I think I might even give up. But what I found really frustrating about the podcast was that I couldn't work out how to edit because I just don't have any editing skills. And in the same way that I don't have any coding skills, I can still build a website. So I thought to myself, I can use Squarespace, so there must be a Squarespace for editing. And I found a Squarespace for editing. So I found this company which will enable you to use artificial intelligence to transcribe everything we've said. You get a written version. And then you can go through and edit the bits out that you don't like. So,
So you edit the text, but it changes the audio.
So exactly. So let's say we edited the text where I said I don't want to actually make a podcast, even though I started trying. Take that out of history. Out it comes. The video changes.
That's kind of magic.
Blew my mind. It is kind of magic. And I think that there's moments like that for me when I realize why it is so important that we enable artificial intelligence researchers to continue their good work. Because, of course, we have loads of risks that come from building this technology, but there are just tiny things like that where I was like, actually, that does make our lives better. And of course, it's a really small thing, and we could be doing it ourselves. And but I just really like.
But I think that's always been the story with technology. When you, someone who's worked in technology for a long time, the first objection to people who are late adopters of technology is, why would I want a computer to do that or a machine to do that when I can do it myself? And it was as true for people saying to me when I first started sending emails rather than faxes, why would you do that when I can send a fax, as it probably was when someone said, well, we've now got a machine that can mill corn rather than you sort of smashing it with a big sort of pestle, or I'm sure the sort of early humans arguing over why they need to cook their meat with this thing called fire. I mean, there's often that question, which is, why would I need to do that? Oh, someone's asking what the name of the company is.
So I'm just gonna find it. I knew that was gonna happen, and then I realized that I have to find it. It's gonna take me a few seconds.
Okay, so Tabitha's got a slow AI search engine.
Dispatch. DIS. Here we are. Can I put it in? I can't put it in. No, it's not called that. It's not called that. There's a list of them.
Descript.
Gather.
Gather. It's called Gather.
No, it's not called Gather.
Okay, we don't know the name.
I finally have found it. Descript. It is called Descript.
It is Descript. Okay, DESCRIPT.
DESCRIPT, yes.
Yeah. So that's a company. And that's quite interesting because that is a classic case of AI as a piece of technology that is providing us with superhuman powers. It's doing something that a human would have had to do, might have taken hours at a time, and now you do it in seconds directly on your screen.
And so what starts to happen in your mind, what starts to play out in your mind sometimes, for a lot of people is, well, then that was going to put editors out of work. Mm-hmm. And I think what I have tried to do in the book is explain that pieces of technology like that don't put jobs out of work. What they do is they put, take tasks out of somebody's job. And what I try and do is kind of start the debate so that women can start to have a think about, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Where do they sit? How does their job sit? So there's a table towards the end. I'll tell you what page. There's a table on page 200 where there's an exercise where I ask people to write down the tasks in their job. And if they write down the tasks in their job and then they put them into 4 columns. So one column, which is full automation. So that could totally be done by a machine and I shouldn't be doing it. One which could be automated. One which is like, it's going to take a long time. And one which is for humans only. And so then if you can start to see like a picture of like a map, like a kind of new kind of map of what your job would look like, or looks like today, could look like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, and you start to imagine how that changes. What I'm hoping it does is then it gives people the impetus to learn the trades and the tools, learn the skills in the middle 2 columns, and also double down on the human-only elements, which in many cases are often the traits that women have been told to have, like problem solving, argument fixing, caring for people, and all of those bits that we definitely won't be seeing machines doing. So they can go in that kind of human-only column, lean into being really good at those. But don't be afraid of the ones that could be fully automated, because you have to start acknowledging that and use the technology and the tools there so you become better than anybody else at using Descript.
That's one of the. Sorry, I just want to say that's something that's quite interesting, that you talk about the. You talk about the set of jobs that machines won't be able to do in the near future, right? And I think there is this strong concordance, right? That things that are to do with complex communication. So barking at an Alexa or a Siri to tell you the time or set a timer is not complex communication, but articulating to a team or a teenager what might need to happen in a situation of some ambiguity is something that requires a very, very high level of nuance and sophisticated communication. And part of your argument is actually that people in general, and women in perhaps in particular, are sort of advantaged in those areas which machines will get to last. Yeah.
That's my hope. And belief. And a lot of people used to think that I was a little bit sort of Pollyanna-ish or a little bit too optimistic. But then Rutger Bregman's book came out about optimism, and suddenly, like, I'm all popular again. I'm allowed to be optimistic. I think, I think that if enough people believe what I believe that is the case, then that's where the focus will be, because that's where consumer trends will go, and then therefore that's where technology should go.
One of the interesting challenges, I suppose, that we face is, and it's been well reported. It's something I've written a lot about, and I've spoken with people like Meredith Whittaker and others around, is a question of ethical AI and the AI systems that we already have today that may perform poorly, or they may also serve to strengthen and accentuate sort of existing structural problems that we have within our systems. And many of those problems are things that sort of negatively affect women. In the conversations that you had, how aware were people of those issues?
completely unaware. And I didn't think it would be so much of a shock. I think that people like you and I are in a real bubble of hundreds of thousands, not a small bubble, but of people who have read all of these books, right? We have read Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression. We've read Kalina Carruthers-Perez, so we understand what the data gender gap is. But I went on Chris Evans and
who is Chris Evans?
Chris Evans, the Virgin most popular radio show in the world, right? Sorry, in the UK right now.
And he's a virgin.
So. He's a virgin now.
Yeah,
Oh, so he's not. Yes, he is at Virgin.
Right.
And he was sort of my 90s dream, really. I mean, I grew up watching him at Big Breakfast, and then he was the radio producer. So I was a little starstruck, but let's get over my starstruckness. But I thought to myself, like, he's going to know about this, right? Because, he informs the nation. And he and his co-presenter were so shocked about the data gender gap, which was coined by Kalina Carruthers-Perez. Mm-hmm. And some of the stories that I pull out in the book from other authors around, for example, the story about seatbelts being built in the shape of a man's body, and therefore women dying 70% more likely than men in a car crash. They were like, whoa, shut the door. Like, I don't, but it was this kind of absolute, not just shock, it was like incredulous. It was like, that cannot possibly be true.
Right.
I get the same with my friends. My female friends are like, no, Tabs, you're just hamming this up. Like, stop. It's so boring. Or why are you always talking to us about racist machines and sexist algorithms? You're so boring. Ugh. And that's what I'm concerned about, is because especially privileged women, mostly privileged women, don't think about this because they don't have to, because it hasn't affected them yet. Yeah. And so I'm trying to be a bit of a wake-up call for some of my friends who I hope are not listening, who just are like blind to this, deaf to this, don't want to know.
It's the challenge of the bubbles in which we live. I mean, one of the things I'd say about the ethical AI question, I did some work with. I'm on the board of the Ada Lovelace Foundation, which is independent research group looking at the ethics of AI and data. And I spent a little bit of time helping the ethics AI team at Accenture for a little while as well. Is that I've been quite surprised at the speed with which a large number of institutions, academics, activists, programmers have picked up the torch of the ethics problem, and they've started to dive into it across many different disciplines. So some things are happening really at the actual level at which AI systems are built. So sort of Google's ethical AI group has these things called model cards, which start to test AI systems against particular cohorts of people, which they generally weren't. And then you've got guidelines and frameworks that are being presented. And I think back to when I first started writing about sort of ethics issues in technology, some of which I had seen from having built companies in the space back in 2014 or 2015. And I think if you'd asked the me of then and say, how aware will people be? What level of activity will there be? I would have been surprised at how important this has become and what an agenda item it's been. I mean, I think over 40 countries now have ethical AI frameworks. And that is not what the me of 2015 would have thought. But I suppose that where I am surprised is that these titanic ethical horrors continue to emerge from industry and from governments. We've had an exam grading fiasco that used algorithms very poorly in the summer in the UK, and week after week you hear another bad use of AI systems within law enforcement. What do you think it takes to kind of close the professional awareness gap? Because I think AI professionals are aware of this from the actual reality on the ground of these systems being more ethical.
Yeah. I have so many different answers to that. I think education is probably the main answer, but that's not really the interesting answer. I think the interesting answer, or kind of what my gut says, is that actually we need to really be a lot more careful about what we do use AI for. So it wasn't the fault of the exam algorithm was certainly not AI, and I'm sure everyone listening knows that. But the fault was using technology even for that very, very, very sensitive political, social challenge. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's not much in that scenario that the AI ethicist can do other than say, don't use AI. It's just not for this piece of tech. There are so many other places that AI should be applied. And that was a moment where it just shouldn't have been applied. It was, you're trying to normalize something that is incredibly unique. So
don't you think, I just want to ask a question here though, that there's also, one of the appeals of using these systems is, and there's an obvious appeal, which is that you can have a system that's much more efficient, right? You talked about how Descript was 1,000 times more efficient than using a human, right? So you've got millions of decisions you need to make as a government, you've got constrained resources, this can be good. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's good is that an AI system is at least, it's objective in the sense that, you know, if you or I are both hit by a hammer, it hurts, you know, the same amount, right? Because AI is just a tool. It's just like another hammer, right? So it'll do a similar sort of thing, and that's an argument they can use. But I think the other thing that struck me, particularly in public sector uses of AI, is that it allowed politicians to stand back from accountability of the decisions. So they could say, look, governor, I'm just a classics graduate from Oxford University. I went to the best science, and the science built the algorithm, and the algorithm went wrong.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I know about Homer and Odysseus. I don't know about the maths. And so do you think that politicians, I mean, you know, difficult position for you because you're on the AI Council, but I mean, hypothetically, do you think that politicians find these new tools appealing because it allows them to disavow responsibility when they go wrong?
They cannot disavow responsibility. The problem with that specific scenario and others that we will come across, you know, next and next and next, is it was not the algorithms. There wasn't an algorithm isn't even a thing. There was no, you cannot apportion blame to the outcome because all of it came down to the question that was being asked. So my grandma used to say, read the question and the answer will take care of itself. And I thought she was a genius. I then found out that it's actually Einstein's quote, but still, my grandmother's quote. If I come back to that every time, it solves every problem for me, because ultimately they asked the wrong question. The question was what led to the biasing of schools that, you know, effectively it led to the normalizing of things that are not normalizable. However, if you had asked some of the AI experts that focus their energy on where AI can be used in the education system, there are loads of places which will not bias, you know, scoring a maths test, doing some of the really boring admin that these teachers need to do. And then what that would have enabled is the people who are the super duper experts to have gone and really figured out how to solve the algorithm, the exam situation. Yeah. And then the GCSEs, and then the exams this summer coming. So we have an opportunity to do this again, right? The fact that schools are being so underfunded means that there isn't enough people to be you know, there's enough time to be doing this properly. But if you used AI in certain areas where you should be applying artificial intelligence, then maybe we would have some people you know, they not only people, but also they would have the kind of the energy and the time.
Let's think about this, because you're on the chair of the UK Government AI Council, which means presumably you have the ear of important people in politics. What is the lesson that they have taken away from the AI, the algorithmic scoring of A-level results? And just for our international listeners, the issue was that we couldn't take the final end of school exams in the UK, and so because of the pandemic, and as a result, they used an algorithm to score people, and it turned out to be a real mess. And people who know a little about this thought it was going to be a problem from the start. And there's been some exceptional work from the AI community and the data science community to identify where this thing went wrong. But my sense is that that's not the lesson government will have learned from this. And I'm curious to ask you directly, what do you think they have learned from the this algorithmic cacophony that they launched on us over the summer?
I can't say what lessons they learned. I can
like them to have learned.
Well, I can say that. I'm excited that I have to say that for me, that the moment of this, there were students outside number 10 screaming profanities were around algorithms, was a real wake-up call for everybody. Who knows? Can you swear on LinkedIn Live? Anyway,
fuck.
There was an amazing moment,
Right.
People were angry about something. And I think there has been a wake-up, I'm sure there has been a wake-up call from that perspective. But the thing that I'm really excited about and have been working with is people like the Office of National Statistics and the Cabinet Office to think about, with GDS, the Government Digital Service, about how do you make sure that these mistakes, as I'd like to call it, don't happen again. And it should be completely possible that they don't need to happen, because at any point where anybody is concerned, I think the answer is just don't apply AI. Sorry, in this case, it was just an algorithm. Don't apply an algorithm. Yeah. There is an opportunity. There has got to be an opportunity where we say we don't need to use a tech solution for something that doesn't bode well if we use a tech solution. And then that is strange coming from me as a tech queen. I would like to apply it to everything I can, but not things that shouldn't be.
I think there's a question there about how you build capacity within governments to have these tools to hand. So governments have got these incredible capacities. They can do things that other organizations can't. And there are bits of government that understand a process and scientific method and data, and there are bits of government that understand how to scale things. But it seems to be the case that with this particular technology and some of the ramifications it has, one needs to get under the hood early on. And you see this very often in the early days of technologies, which is that at the beginning, in order to make sense of it, you need to be what we call a full stacker. When I started to build websites, which was in 1993, you needed to understand what router you had, and you needed to understand what hard drive was in the server and the operating system. And nowadays, you just go to Squarespace and you get up a website up and running in 5 minutes. And it seems like the mismatch is that people who are probably senior in sort of civil service in the UK and in other countries, and people who are making the decisions at the political level, so what we would call a minister or a cabinet minister, don't necessarily have the familiarity with the ramifications of this tool that perhaps they do with the other tools of government, for example, tax policy or dropping bombs on people. And that's just something that people like you and I have to help them educate with. We're coming to the top of time. So I really appreciate, I know you're super busy and you've got your young child sort of sequestered away somewhere, but you also have the book now, How to Talk to Robots, A Girl's Guide to a Future Dominated by AI, which is available in bookstores. If people want to follow you on social media, TikTok, Twitter, how's the best way of finding you?
So I'm Tabitha Gold on Twitter, and I'm How Robots for the book specifically, because I didn't want to didn't want to confuse both sets of people. And I am going to launch a TikTok competition to dance like a robot, but I just haven't yet found my crew to do it with. So,
so if anyone is
you can do that.
good dancer. We're thinking body popping here is my sense, or parkour. Let Tabitha know. Yeah, perfect. And thanks everyone for taking time out of your afternoon. The next session that we're having on these sort of book talks is next Friday. It's with John Micklethwaite, the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, previously at The Economist, where we will be talking about the wake-up call. Essentially, why is it that the West fumbled its response to the pandemic? And I would love to see lots of you there. And for those of you who aren't following me on Twitter, I'm at Azeem, 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 for those of you who live west of Iceland. And please do sign up to Exponential View, exponentialview.co. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you soon.